Hi everyone, my name is Tim Herbig and I work as a product management coach. In this video, I want to give you a quick walkthrough of a Miro template I created specifically to run remote ideation sessions, which might be part or hopefully part of your own product discovery efforts. Now, the core concepts in this session are based on existing concepts or ideas you might have seen out there and my own work with remote and other product teams out there. And I've just basically make sure to match together lots of approaches which have worked for me over the years and avoiding some of the mistakes I made in the beginning. So that being said, let's take a closer look at how this template is set up. Now, this template is set up in a way that you can also use it to facilitate actual cross-functional ideation sessions, meaning you don't just want to do that with the developers and the designers on your team, but you also want to incorporate the input and knowledge and opinions from other departments like marketing or sales at this point. So therefore, I have set up the board in a way that you can use it with an actual introduction part. So whenever you bring in people which might not be working with you on such a regular basis, there's a small welcome template here, a welcome space to introduce yourself as a moderator, as a facilitator, outline the goals of the session, and making clear to everybody what's happening next when they might be waiting in the remote meeting. Now, because you will probably work with people who are not that familiar with using tools like Miro, I've also incorporated a short Miro 101 section, which you can use to tell people the gist of how to use Miro effectively, specifically during remote ideation sessions like these. Feel free to include or exclude that, depending on how mature or comfortable your team already is with working with Miro. Now, one of the most important aspects when it comes to running ideation sessions is to provide enough context. Because no matter how cross-functional your team operates, probably not everybody is involved in the discovery and research activities to the same degree, which is why it's so helpful to take the time in the beginning to set the stage and give everybody the context of what you're trying to achieve. Now, in this situation, what I love to use is use a framework called impact mapping, where you can also, for which you can also find a template in the Miroverse provided by myself, which helps you to structure your activities, moving through product discovery spaces and documenting the pieces of evidence you collect along the way. So you want to give the context by telling people, hey, what's the overall impact we're trying to achieve? What are the user groups we're focusing on right now? And which changes in behavior are we actually trying to create for these? So by doing that, you basically bring everybody up to speed and tell them what you have learned so far and what you want to achieve next. Now, the first real activity you could do here, and again, this is highly optional, is to sort of allow people to reflect and summarize what they have learned so far. So, for example, you might want to focus on a specific user group and how they behave, and just a fun way to document and collect what's working well for this user group or what might not be working that well for this user group is to use the sailboat metaphor. So you might know this framework or this visualization from a retrospective perspective, but I also think that it's a great way of summarizing interview or research observations. Now, in order to avoid group thinking and everybody just dumping their post-it notes in this main space right away, we actually try to avoid group thinking a lot and give every individual on this workshop the time and space he or she needs to focus on their own ideas first before the group discussion happens. In order to achieve that, I have created a couple of individual idea parking lots, which really give everybody enough space to zoom in and have enough really just space and freedom to document their own post-it notes first. And for using a 5-minute timer, they can just start to type the observation and do that over the course of 5 minutes. And then after those 5 minutes, as a facilitator, you get everybody to share their post-it notes and make sure to remove duplicates and form clusters at the very core. Moving forward, you then want to focus on the pains, right? So on the anchors, what is holding this user group back? Because actually, ultimately, you're trying to change their behavior to, in a way which probably addresses some of the pains you have identified before. Now, in order to do that, I would encourage you to run a dot voting session. I personally prefer the built-in anonymous dot voting, which is built into Miro, over the visual way of using basically red circles and shapes on the space, because this helps you with, again, avoiding group thinking and avoiding hierarchies, so everybody has enough confidence and freedom to place their votes how they think is best. After the vote has been conducted and there are no follow-up discussions or conflicts here, make sure to clean everything up by really putting the top 5 problems here and this in-between step to clean everything a bit up and make it a bit more straightforward for everybody to continue working with it. Now, that in mind, the next step you want to do is to reframe those problems as challenges. Right, and for this session, I really recommend to only run one ideation session per challenge, because typically people are not really able to do multiple rounds of ideation for multiple problems within one session. So after this point, after selecting the top problems worth solving and turning them into challenges, I highly recommend just focusing on the first and the top challenge for now and focus the rest of the ideation session on that. So what we want to do, let's say we have the problem identified that a person never knows whether someone on their team is actually available, and translating that into a challenge could sound like, how might we make everybody's availability more transparent? Okay, so this will be the challenge we will be focusing on for the rest of the session. And the way you want to run the ideation really is totally up to you. I personally prefer incorporating ideation techniques like Mashup, Brainwriting, Crazy 8, all those things which really help people to get more creative with their way of thinking. For the case of this example, we're just using straightforward individual brainstorming, but feel free to incorporate other creative techniques which work really well even in a remote context. So give people a bit of introduction about the way you want to run those ideations. Again, we try to stay away from group thinking as much as possible, which means for the actual ideation space, we make sure that the challenge is repeated one more time, that it's visible for everybody, and we continue to work with those individual idea parking lots. So make sure to have one idea parking lot for every team member who participates in the session, maybe even copy and paste the challenge into their individual parking lot so it's very present and visible for them. Give them 5 or 8 minutes to come up with as many ideas as possible, and again, walk them through the process of removing duplicates, forming clusters for those ideas. You can do this multiple times before going to the actual voting. I've seen tremendous results of letting people do many rounds of Crazy 8 ideations over the same challenge over and over again to really get out of this normal comfort zone. But for the sake of this example, we're staying with one ideation session in one round. After that, again, you want to do the voting, do it individually and in silence. I can only encourage you to use the anonymous dot voting, which is built in. Make sure to rank and visualize the top solution the group has agreed on to continue work with. And then you want to structure those ideas even further, because it's not just enough to have a dot voting on which you think which idea is best. In order to create an actual shared understanding of where to go next, I would encourage you to cluster the ideas. And I would encourage you to cluster them in terms of looking at 2 main criteria. The first criteria is, how high or low do we think is the effort to launch an experiment around this idea? Right? Is it super simple by just sending out an email survey with a scribble to our users, or does it actually require engineering work to launch an A/B test or smoke test on the website or the app? And the other criteria you want to look at is, how high or low is the confidence we have in changing the desired customer behavior? Now remember, the desired change in behavior we want to cause is expressed through the challenge. How might we create change in behavior for user group? So by doing that as a collaborative exercise, you actually get a really good idea of how you want to continue working with all those ideas you have been coming up. Do you just want to launch them now if there's low effort to do them, but you have high confidence that they create a change in behavior? Or is it actually that you have high confidence, but it also takes more effort to launch an experiment, which means you probably need to do some follow-up work. In order to wrap up an ideation session, make sure to leave people with clear next steps. Again, one of my favorite ways of doing that is use the impact mapping framework to visualize where those ideas are going right now. Just because an idea has been developed in an ideation workshop like this doesn't mean that it gets built ultimately. Make sure to be explicit about the process of validating ideas first, launch experiments around that, give people follow-up resources, maybe follow-up Miro board where they can find the status of how their ideas will be used, and make sure everybody leaves the workshop with a great sense of their contribution. I hope this was helpful. Again, there are probably lots of variations possible of how to do ideation sessions. in the remote team, but this is a step-by-step process which has worked really well for me. Feel free to insert your own suggestions and frameworks into that. I think it's set up in a way which allows for lots of flexibility and modularity. Have fun.